Hello again. I am hugely excited to tell you today's piece of news, which is that I have produced some brand new, fully decodable phonics poems, completely matched to letters and sounds. So they cover all the graphemes which are introduced in the programme and all the tricky words for reading which are introduced in the programme in the order that they are introduced, so phase by phase. I have been a little bit concerned by the lack of phonics poems which seem to be out there, considering that poetry is a huge part of the national curriculum and is specifically mentioned in the new reading framework, actually. And poems are a very important text type for children to read themselves. I've also been concerned particularly by the lack of very simple, repetitive, early pink reading books, which support our very earliest readers, particularly the lowest 20%. But actually, I found that the vast majority of children respond really well to repetitive texts at those very, very earliest levels in order to keep the texts at what we call instructional level. So writing these poems has enabled me to cover the poetry aspect that seems to be missing, and also to create some very simple repetitive texts for children at those earliest levels, which I know a lot of you have also been looking for. So the poems come with scripts which can be used by any practitioner who is using the poems with the children. Of course, you don't have to follow those. You may have your own ideas of how you want to use the poems, but the feedback that I've had from schools who've used them is that the scripts have been very, very easy for support staff particularly to follow when doing poems with one-to-one in one-to-one reading situations or with small groups of children. At the bottom of each poem, I have written the graphemes and tricky words that poem particularly covers. And I've also given you an idea as to which book band it might relate to. They've not been formally banded. I have simply used my teaching experience to give a guide to the book band that I think is most likely. So the poems can be used in different ways. So you could choose to use them for shared reading, either within literacy lessons or outside literacy lessons. You might choose to use them as models for writing, and that would fit very well inside literacy lessons. So if I give you an example, this is a poem from phase 5A, which covers AY, OU, EA, AW, and the tricky word looked. And it's called Under the Sea. I looked around way under the sea. I saw a trout with a tray swimming to me. I looked to the right in the deep blue sea. I spied a lobster in a pair of jeans snapping at me. I looked to the left in the waves of the sea. I found a prawn eating some pie and looking at me. I looked beneath me down in the sea. I saw a yawning shark thinking what to have for tea. So I think the light's not caught that terribly well. There we go. So that would be a very easy poem to innovate on for the children. You could take the structure of verse 1. I looked around way under the sea. And what can they see? So you could go for the fantasy angle like this poem has, or you could go for things they might actually see under the sea. So I looked around way under the sea. I saw a huge whale blowing bubbles at me. I looked around way under the sea. I saw a mermaid with a crown looking at me. So you could put lots of ideas. So the poems that have a pattern and a structure are particularly useful for innovating on. You could choose to use them for one-to-one reading sessions or guided reading sessions. They are, I should say actually, the poems are, a lot of them are linked to everyday classroom themes. So that makes them kind of fit, you can easily make them fit as well into topics that you might be covering. You could choose to use them as texts to build into poetry collections. So those could be the collections that the children could take home with them and enjoy rereading. They could be collections of poems you could put together and have in your reading area for children to reread. So particularly where you've used a poem as a whole class shared read or in a guided situation, that you could have those poems then in a class collection in the reading corner for the children to reread. So they can also be used in different formats. Because they are available as downloads, you can easily then, so it's a PDF, you could easily then display that on your interactive whiteboard if you wanted to use the poems for whole class or small group reading sessions. Or if you're lucky enough to have tablets, I never was in the classroom, but if you're lucky enough to have tablets for reading sessions, you could put the poems on a tablet for the children to read. You could choose to print them onto card. So this one I've printed onto card and laminated, so the children could have a card poem in front of them. You could also choose to laminate the scripts that go with them, and you could keep those together with the card versions in wallets ready for your guided reading sessions. You could collect the poems into little folders. So I've provided this front cover, and then as you add poems to the collection, as the children's phonic knowledge progresses, you can add the poems in. So that is the sort of thing you could put into your reading corner. It's the sort of thing that you might be able to put in a children's book bag. It would have to stay in the book bag so it didn't get lost. And then you could be adding to it, very easily add it to it just with a treasury tag. And then that also meets the national curriculum objective of children rereading known texts. So I think there are potentially a few advantages to having downloadable texts. So actually they're cheaper to purchase than buying full-on reading books. If a child loses one, they're very easy to replace because you just print off another one. You've got no annual fee to pay to use them on your whiteboards or on tablets. They can be kept by the children, so they haven't got to be returned to school as a reading book would be. The children could actually keep them and enjoy rereading them. You could actually write on them if needed. Obviously, we don't do that with reading books because they are books and we don't write on books. But if a child particularly needed to have sound buttons added underneath a word, if you've laminated the poems, you could easily do that with a whiteboard pen. Or if you'd printed them out onto paper, you could easily add the sound buttons with a pen, and it wouldn't actually matter in the same way that it would. You obviously wouldn't do that with a book. If you've got children who need to have their text printed out onto different coloured backgrounds for specific reasons, obviously you can do that as well. So the feedback from the poems has been really positive. So the children have apparently been very engaged with their reading. They've been very motivated to read as well. So if you're interested in having a try of some of them, there are some free samples available on the link at the top of this post. So if you want to have a go, then please do so. At the moment, there are poems for phases 2, 3, 4, 5A, 5B. 5C should be ready within the next week to 2 weeks. I'm also in the process of putting together an additional set of poems for phase 2 because I'm conscious that you need to have a real breadth of texts at that level because children often need a lot of practice in those early stages. So those will be coming out soon. So I hope you're as excited about that as I am, and I hope you have a go at downloading the samples, try those out with the children. I would love to hear how you've got on with those. It's always lovely to hear how things are being used in school.